It was a regular Saturday afternoon at Oakwood Plaza Mall, a busy shopping center in Lexington, Kentucky. Families strolled through the halls, children tugged at their parents' hands, and the warm scent of pretzels and cinnamon filled the air. It was just another ordinary day until someone unusual walked in. A man in a sharp black blazer and jeans stepped through the food court entrance. His face was instantly recognizable, drawing curious glances. He wore dark sunglasses and, more noticeably, a bright red MAGA hat that stood out sharply in the mall's polished atmosphere. Whispers spread fast. "Is that Elon Musk?" A teenage boy near the fountain squinted, quickly pulling out his phone to snap a picture. "No way," his friend muttered, though he, too, had already started recording. Why would he be here? Within minutes, small groups of shoppers discreetly gathered, their murmurs filled with excitement and disbelief. The man, however, seemed unbothered, strolling through the mall as if he had all the time in the world. He paused at an electronics kiosk, examining a display of drones, his expression unreadable behind reflective lenses. Meanwhile, in the mall's central office, manager John Whitaker was finishing a routine staff meeting. Known for his strict approach and dedication to keeping the mall family-friendly, John took rule enforcement seriously. One of those rules: no political displays in public spaces. A knock on the door interrupted the meeting. It was Nancy, a security supervisor, looking unusually tense. "John, you might want to come out here," she said. "We've got a situation." "What kind of situation?" John asked, already standing. Nancy hesitated. "Well, Elon Musk is here, or at least someone who looks exactly like him, and he's wearing a MAGA hat." John blinked. "You're kidding." "I wish I was." John sighed, grabbing his radio. "All right, let's handle this." By the time he reached the main floor, a small crowd had formed. People craned their necks, whispered, and recorded every second. The man had now made his way to the bookstore. The man flipped through a book on artificial intelligence, ironically titled "The Future We Build." John's jaw tightened as he approached, his polished loafers clicking against the tiled floor. He kept his voice steady but firm. "Excuse me, sir. Can I have a word with you?" The man turned slowly, lowering his sunglasses. His face, if it wasn't Elon Musk's, was an almost perfect match. The crowd fell silent. "Yes?" the man said, his voice calm but carrying a quiet authority. John's eyes flickered to the bright red hat. "I'm going to have to ask you to remove the hat or leave the premises. We have a strict policy about keeping this space neutral." The man raised an eyebrow as if amused. "A neutral environment?" he repeated. "Yes, sir. Political attire can be divisive, and we want everyone to feel comfortable here." The man's lips curled slightly. "Interesting policy," he said, not moving an inch. "But I have no intention of removing the hat." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. More people lifted their phones, openly recording. John felt the weight of their stares, the cameras capturing every moment. "Sir, I'm asking you politely," John said, his voice firm. "If you don't comply, I'll have to involve security." The man folded his arms, the red hat catching the overhead lights. "Do what you have to do," he said evenly. John's hand hovered over his radio. The tension in the air thickened. He pressed the button, calling for backup. By now, the scene had drawn a large crowd. Mothers with strollers paused. Teenagers leaned over railings on the second floor. Even the pretzel vendor abandoned his cart to get a better look. Almost every person had their phone out, live streaming, snapping photos. Moments later, 2 uniformed security guards arrived. One of them, a tall, burly man named Eric, stepped beside John, arms crossed. Beside Eric stood Mia, a younger security guard, her eyes darting nervously between John and the man in the red hat. Unlike Eric, she looked uneasy. The man remained calm, standing his ground. He didn't fidget, didn't shift, just waited, his expression unreadable but faintly amused. "Sir," John repeated, his voice now firmer. "This is your final warning. Remove the hat or leave the mall. The man glanced at the guards, then back at John. "And if I don't?" he asked, his voice steady, almost challenging. "Then we'll have to escort you out," Eric cut in, stepping forward slightly. "For wearing a hat?" The man raised his eyebrows, then chuckled, shaking his head. "Do you hear yourselves?" The crowd grew louder. "This is ridiculous. Let him wear the hat," shouted a middle-aged man in a denim jacket. "He's not hurting anyone," a young woman added, holding up her phone to record, but not everyone agreed. "This is private property. They can enforce their rules," someone countered from the back. "It's not about the hat, it's about keeping politics out of public spaces," another voice chimed in. The man took a slow step closer to John. His presence was commanding, yet not threatening. Then, in a low voice, just enough for John to hear, he asked, "Is this really about the hat, or is it about who you think I am?" John's breath hitched for a split second. The question landed harder than he expected. He straightened, trying to keep his composure. "This isn't personal, sir," John said stiffly. "Rules are rules." "Rules are rules," the man echoed softly, almost as if speaking to himself. Then he removed his sunglasses. Piercing blue eyes stared back at John. The crowd gasped, as if they had all been holding their breath. "Oh my God, it is him," someone whispered. "Elon Musk," a teenage girl shrieked, her voice cutting through the noise. The man smiled faintly but said nothing, neither confirming nor denying it. He simply stood there, letting the moment stretch. John felt sweat forming at the back of his neck. He wasn't just managing a mall anymore. He was caught in the middle of a growing spectacle. Taking a deep breath, he tried again. "I'm asking you one more time. Will you remove the hat or leave?" The man's smile faded. He tilted his head slightly as if weighing his options. Then in a calm but defiant tone, he said, "No." Eric reached for his arm. The man took a step back, his voice rising just enough for the crowd to hear. "You're going to forcibly remove me? Go ahead. Let the world see." The crowd erupted. Some cheered. Others gasped. Phones captured every second. Shouts rang out, some demanding security back off, others defending the mall's policy. And just like that, the situation teetered on the edge of chaos. Mia glanced at John, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do we do now?" John hesitated. The situation had spiraled into a public relations nightmare. No matter what he did, someone would be outraged. And by nightfall, this would be everywhere on social media. Before he could respond, the man raised a hand. The crowd quieted, their eyes locked on him. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be," he said, his voice steady. He turned to John. "But before you decide, maybe you should hear why I'm here." Curiosity rippled through the crowd. Even John, despite his frustration, found himself listening. After a long pause, John exhaled. "All right, let's hear it. But if this is some kind of stunt, you'll understand soon enough." The man interrupted, his tone carrying quiet confidence. Clasping his hands together, he took a slow, deliberate step forward. His voice rang clear, drawing in every ear. "You all think this is about a hat," he said, scanning the crowd, locking eyes with a few onlookers. "But it's not. It never is." Murmurs faded. Phones stayed up, recording every word. The gathering swelled, spilling into nearby corridors. Employees leaned against counters, shopkeepers watched from their doorways, captivated. The man gestured lightly toward John. "You're just doing your job, enforcing policies, keeping order. I get it. But sometimes the rules we follow cause more harm than good." John's patience thinned. "Look, I don't know what point you're trying to make. Let me finish," the man said, his hand lifting, not aggressive but firm. A ripple went through the crowd. John clenched his jaw but motioned for him to continue. The man took a breath, his eyes sweeping across the sea of faces. "Imagine this," he said. "You see someone walking down the street wearing something you disagree with. Maybe it's a hat, maybe it's a shirt, maybe it's just the way they look. You feel uncomfortable, so you decide they shouldn't be allowed in your space. You tell yourself it's about principles, about protecting others from discomfort, but really, it's about fear. Silence hung in the air. Some people nodded subtly. Others shifted, uncomfortable. Then a voice cut through the stillness. But why the hat? Why here? It was a young woman in a striped sweater, her phone aimed squarely at him. The man smiled faintly. Good question. I'll get to that. Then, turning back to John, he asked, Tell me something, Mr. Manager. What do you think people are really afraid of? When they see this hat, the man continued, his voice steady. What are they really afraid of? John hesitated. He needed to choose his words carefully. It's not about fear, he said finally. It's about keeping this mall neutral. Like I said, politics don't belong here. The man raised an eyebrow. Neutrality, huh? Interesting concept. But neutrality isn't silence. It's action. It's allowing people to coexist, even when it's uncomfortable. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few people clapped softly. Others remained unsure where he was going with this. Live streams flooded social media, comments pouring in, some outraged, some admiring. Nancy, the security supervisor, approached John, her phone in hand. We're trending on Twitter, she whispered. MAGA, the mall is blowing up. Thousands are watching. John exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. This is getting out of hand. I can't just let this go. The man, as if sensing John's frustration, stepped forward again. Let me make one thing clear, he said, his voice carrying over the restless crowd. I didn't come here to cause a scene. I came here for a reason. And yes, this hat is part of it, but not for the reason you think. Curiosity overtook skepticism. The crowd leaned in. Even John found himself listening, against his better judgment. Why? Are you here? Someone shouted from the back. What's the big deal? The man smiled faintly, but his eyes held something deeper, something heavier. I'll tell you, he said. But first, let me ask you this. What would you do if everything you thought you knew about someone changed in an instant? Would you listen? Or would you shut them out, just because of what they were wearing? The question hung in the air. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others leaned in, waiting for an answer. John opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the man reached into his pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, holding it up with a solemn expression. This, he said, unfolding it slowly, is why I'm here. The crowd surged forward, trying to see. Phones zoomed in, capturing every detail of the crisp document in his hands. John's stomach tightened as he squinted, trying to read the words. What is it? Someone shouted. The man's expression softened. His voice dropped, forcing everyone to lean in. It's a letter, he said. From a young woman who works here. She asked me for help. And that's exactly why I came. A wave of whispers swept through the crowd. The curiosity had reached its peak. A letter from someone at the mall? The idea seemed almost absurd. People exchanged confused glances, still clutching their phones, eager not to miss a second. John stepped closer, arms crossed. A letter? What does that have to do with you or with this situation? The man fully unfolded the paper, glancing at it briefly before lifting his eyes to the crowd. His voice softened, carrying a weight of sincerity. This letter is from a young woman named Kaylee, he said. She's 21, works at the food court, and dreams of going to college one day. A murmur rippled through the crowd. In the back, a girl wearing a green apron froze, a tray of napkins in her hands. Her face turned pale as she recognized her name. Oh no, she whispered, her hands trembling. The man continued. She wrote to me, because her mother's medical bills are crushing her family. She's been working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. And despite everything, she's still trying to save enough for community college. The energy in the crowd shifted. The tension of confrontation faded into something deeper. Empathy. Even John felt the knot in his stomach loosen, replaced by an unsettling realization. But what does this have to do with you? John asked, his voice quieter now. Why would she write to you? The man smiled faintly, meeting John's gaze. Because she believed I could help, he said simply. He held the letter up again, glancing at the crowd. Kaylee didn't just send this to anyone, she sent it to me, Elon Musk. The crowd erupted, gasps, shouts of disbelief. Phones zoomed in, capturing every detail of his face, comparing him to the man they'd seen on countless news programs. "I told you it was him," a teenage boy exclaimed. "No way," another muttered. "This is insane." Even John, usually unshaken, found himself reeling. He stared at the man, now undeniably Elon Musk, struggling to process what was happening. "Wait. What?" Musk chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You didn't believe me before. And I get it. This isn't exactly a typical day at the mall." He turned back to the crowd, his voice steady. "Kaylee's letter moved me. She didn't ask for money, by the way. She just asked for advice on how to balance her dreams with the weight of her family's struggles. She thought maybe I could give her some guidance." Kaylee, still frozen in the back, tried to shrink behind the soda machine. But the crowd had already spotted her. People turned, pointing, whispering. Her face burned with embarrassment. Musk's voice was gentle. "Kaylee." His eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on her. "You don't have to hide. Come here." She hesitated, heart pounding. Her coworkers nudged her forward. Whispers of encouragement rippled through the crowd. Finally, with trembling hands, Kaylee stepped forward, her green apron still tied around her waist. The crowd parted to let her through. Musk smiled warmly, handing her the letter. "You were brave to write this," he said. "And you were right. I want to help." Kaylee stared at him, eyes wide with disbelief. You actually read it?" she stammered. "I didn't think anyone would." "I did," Musk said firmly. "And I came here today because I wanted to meet you in person." Tears welled in her eyes as the weight of the moment sank in. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you care about someone like me?" Musk placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his voice steady with conviction. "Because people like you are the reason I do what I do. You're the future, and you deserve a chance to build something amazing." The crowd erupted into applause. Some wiped, their eyes moved by the exchange. Even John, despite his earlier frustration, found himself clapping hesitantly, caught up in the moment. Kaylee wiped her tears, her voice shaky. "But I don't know what to do next. I'm just trying to survive." Musk smiled, his gaze steady. "Let's start with this." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "This is for you. Consider it an investment in your future." Kaylee took the envelope with unsteady hands, carefully opening it. Her breath hitched as she scanned the contents. Inside was a check. She gasped, covering her mouth. The crowd leaned in, eager to know what it said. Kaylee's voice cracked as she whispered, It's $50,000. The crowd exploded in cheers. Applause, whistles, and shouts of excitement filled the mall, drowning out any lingering tension from earlier. Kaylee stood frozen, clutching the envelope like a lifeline. Her coworkers rushed to her, sighed, patting her back and offering congratulations. The energy in the crowd buzzed with excitement, everyone eager to capture this once-in-a-lifetime moment on their phones. John stepped forward cautiously. His professionalism warred with the raw emotion of the moment. "Mr. Musk," he began, his voice quieter now. I didn't know about this situation. If I had..." Musk turned to him, his expression calm but firm. "You didn't know because you didn't ask," he said. His words, though gentle, carried enough weight to make John flinch. "You saw a hat and made a judgment. I get it, rules are rules, but sometimes rules need to bend for the right reasons." John nodded, shame washing over him. As the weight of Musk's words settled in, John exhaled deeply. "You're right," he admitted. "I was too focused on enforcing policy to see the bigger picture. I'm sorry." Musk's expression softened, and he offered a small nod. Apology accepted. "Just remember, people are more than what they wear or the opinions they hold. Sometimes it's worth taking a moment to understand the person behind the appearance." A murmur of agreement swept through. The crowd, a few people nodding thoughtfully. Musk turned back to Kaylee, his smile returning. "This is just the beginning," he said. "Use this opportunity to chase your dreams. And when you're in a position to help someone else, pay it forward." Kaylee wiped her tears, her voice trembling. "I will," she promised. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the energy shifted. The entire event had been recorded, shared, and discussed in real time, making waves across social media. News outlets quickly picked up the story, framing it as an unexpected act of kindness from one of the world's most influential figures. Back in his office, John scrolled through Twitter, his face pale as he read the comments. Most praised Musk's generosity and Kaylee's courage, but a fair share criticized John's actions, accusing him of overreach and bias. He sighed, feeling the sting of public opinion. Yet, amid the negativity, one comment stood out. "Sometimes we all need to be reminded to see the humanity in each other." Lesson learned today? Let's do better. That night, Kaylee sat at her kitchen table, the check still in her hands. Across from her, her mother, frail but smiling, reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "You've always been a fighter," she said. "And now, you've got the chance to do something incredible." Kaylee nodded, her determination growing. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt something real. Hope. Meanwhile, Elon Musk's departure from the mall was as understated as his arrival. He declined interviews, waved politely to fans, and slipped away without further fanfare. But his actions left a lasting impact, not just on Kaylee, but on everyone who had witnessed the day's events. The next morning, Oakwood Plaza's management issued a statement apologizing for the incident and promising to review policies to ensure a more inclusive environment. John himself drafted the message, vowing to approach his role with more compassion and understanding moving forward. The story became a viral sensation, sparking conversations across the country about judgment, empathy, and the power of small acts of kindness. Inspired by Kaylee's story, others shared their struggles, leading to a wave of community-driven support initiatives. In the end, what began as a confrontation over a hat transformed into something far greater, a reminder of the humanity that connects us all, even in the most unexpected places.